Stanford University.
Welcome to Stanford Medicine's Contemplation by Design Summit. I'm Dr. Tia Rich, the founder and director of Contemplation by Design. It's my great honor to welcome back our teacher, Furyu Nancy Schroeder, who spoke to us yesterday about the courage of contemplative connections. Today, she'll be guiding us in an interactive workshop titled Finding Your Seat as Self and Community. Join me in warmly welcoming Furyu Schroeder.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rich. What a pleasure to be back, and welcome to all of you who've joined us again this morning. I've been looking forward to continuing this discussion of the age-old practices of meditation that have helped human beings find those sacred spaces, both inside and outside of themselves, and most importantly, in relationship with one another. So I know you're familiar with the images of the Buddha seated under a tree. That image is the ground or the essence of a tradition that I have spent my adult life endeavoring both to embody and to express. So on one hand, the image is very easy to understand. A child can tell you that a person is sitting on the ground under a tree. It's very simple, and yet it's not so easy, especially if you've ever tried sitting quietly under a tree or in a house, either together or by yourself. So all of us who are meditators of one form or another have spent time finding what we call our seat, a somewhat lengthy process in which we discover that the stability of our physical body is in no way separate from the stability of our mind. There's a Buddhist saying that I heard early on in my effort to find my own seat: calming the mind and discerning the real. Meaning, if we can find a way to calm our obsessive thinking and worrying, planning and criticizing, then we can see more clearly what is and isn't so. The isn't so being, as it turns out, much of what we are so obsessively thinking. It takes a lot of courage, so it seems, to turn our attention onto the mind that thinks, and to do so without judgment or defensiveness, in order to simply notice what is going on up there. Once we begin to notice the power of thinking, we begin to understand how that power is continuously creating the world in which we live, the most intimate of all worlds, ceaselessly swirling within and without the boundaries of our physical bodies, a world that is constantly changing, like the reflections of the moon bouncing about on the waves of a windswept sea. Calming the waves of the mind is a traditional metaphor in Buddhist teaching, and instructions for doing so abound. At the heart of that effort is a profound wish to cultivate the joy of intimate relationships with ourselves and with the world. As we say in Zen, warm hand to warm hand. In the 2023 summit, which I understand is focusing on the role of contemplative practices and relationships, especially about the kind of relationships that you all are having during your university studies of mentorship and leadership, all of which require of you an active presence and a clarity of seeing, calming the mind and discerning the real. So the balance of our time together today, I'm going to be offering some basic instruction in meditation as it's taught in Soto Zen, as well as its philosophical underpinnings. Soto Zen, as with all of the Buddhist traditions, has its roots in those long hours a young Indian prince spent sitting quietly under a tree over 2,500 years ago. And given that we have the same human bodies with the same relationships to gravity and balance, there are a few things we can be fairly sure are the same for us in endeavoring to meditate as they were for the young prince. So at this point, I invite all of you to consider how it is that you're sitting right now. And if at all possible and reasonably comfortable, allow your spine to straighten upward, with the top of your head aiming at the ceiling. Let your shoulder blades flatten down your back. And below your shoulder blades, notice the long curve in your lower back. And let that curve deepen inwardly towards your abdomen. At the same time, lift your sternum. Those two simple movements should result in a more upright seated posture. And if you like, give that simple movement of your spine a try. And next, let your head rest easily on the top of your spine, allowing whatever tension is there in your face, your neck, down on your torso and on your arms to simply melt away. And if at this time you're sitting in a chair, as I am, if possible, allow your feet to be parallel and flat on the floor. If you're seated on the floor, your legs will be crossed either in a full lotus with both ankles on top of both thighs, or a half lotus with one ankle on top of one thigh, or the Burmese position in which one leg is simply folded in front of the other. In the seated meditation practice of Soto Zen, our hands are folded in what I mentioned yesterday and showed you as the cosmic mudra, with the thumb tips located at your navel. I'm going to show you that lovely image. I remember my own teacher one time, I was sitting in front of him with my cosmic mudra, and I had it quite wide and open, kind of like that. And he said, that seems a little big. And so eventually I learned how to sit with my cosmic mudra more in what I think is a very lovely shape, this oval, with the right hand below the left and the thumb tips gently touching together. In fact, touching the thumb tips is one way I kind of think of it as sort of a reminder to me when I'm sitting for longer sits. When my thumbs start to collapse, I'm pretty sure I'm going to sleep. So that really helps me to bring my attention back to my sitting posture. Cosmic mudra. So keep your eyes open during sitting and gazing softly down at about a 45-degree angle downwardly toward the floor, in your case, wherever you're sitting, down to whatever is in front of you. One person asked me, why do you keep your eyes open? Why not close your eyes? And one of the sayings in Zen I heard early on was, closing the eyes is entering the cave of the demons. And I thought, whoa. So basically you can daydream a lot more easily with your eyes closed. So one of the reasons we keep our eyes open, it's pretty clear that that's still the floor right there in front of you. We tend to stay where we are in the present when we have our eyes open. Next, let your breath flow naturally up and out from your abdomen, in and out through your nose. And let's try that just for a few minutes by inhaling completely and exhaling completely. So I'm going to just let about 2 minutes go by now and let you try whatever way you're sitting and just sit quietly for that period of time. I'm going to ring a bell now and then again 2 minutes from now. I'm sorry I can't actually show you these positions and make suggestions for your posture, but there are good video instructions available online, including from the San Francisco Zen Center, as well as the possibility of finding your own local meditation group and teacher, or coming to visit us at the Zen Center. We would certainly appreciate that. The City Center, Tassajara, or Green Gulch Farm, where I am up in Marin. So once you've experimented enough with finding an upright sitting posture and can remain still for about 30 or 40 minutes, which the best part of seated meditation comes, and that is doing nothing at all. And yet what a surprise for us, as it was for the young prince as he sat there without moving or speaking, that the entire world appeared to arrive at his feet, rolling in like those waves on the windswept sea. While he sat there, seemingly unmoving, a wild array of appearances arose inside of him as described in this brief retelling of his encounter with a character by the name of Mara, the Evil One. Mara's official title in ancient Buddhist literature is the Master of Illusions. So here's the story. After many years struggling to put an end to his own personal suffering, a suffering that had resulted from a rather late exposure to the facts of life, namely, that even a handsome young prince such as himself was subject to decay, that his body and mind would in time succumb to aging, sickness, and death, and that for a person with everything, losing everything seemed intolerable. And so he ran away from home. He ran away from the facts of life, as if he could. Once away from the comforts of palace life, he strenuously endeavored to master the primary spiritual techniques of his day, namely, forms of meditation that induced blissful trances. When that didn't work as a permanent fix, he turned to extreme forms of asceticism that resulted in the wasting away of his strength and, as intended, of his passions, until, still wholly unsatisfied, and plagued with dis-ease, he left the community of ascetics and went alone into the forest to sit by himself and to wait. However, he did not simply sit. He sat with great determination to discover within himself the source of his misery. So this effort at self-discovery was echoed centuries later by Soto Zen founder Dogen Zenji, who said that to study the Buddha way is to study the self, to study our own perceptions, our own thoughts and feelings, and our own impulses, in order to see how what I call myself and what I call the world are being created in the first place. Looking closely at ourselves is a radical act, the same one the Buddha to be had been undertaking during 6 long years in the forest and then for 7 long days upright under what would be called the Bodhi tree, or the tree of enlightenment. It's during those 7 days that Mara, the Evil One, makes his first appearance. Sensing that this young man might be on the verge of a serious breakthrough that we now call awakening, Mara sends an army of demons to threaten him with extinction if he doesn't abandon his quest. And yet, despite the pain and injury that he felt, the young prince remained seated, quietly breathing. When faced with such an unwavering resolve, the army suddenly vanished. Next, Mara sent his dancing boys and dancing girls to tempt the young man up from his seat. And again the prince remained upright and still. Finally, having failed with the best of his mind games, Mara himself, shrouded in smoke, appeared and spoke to the prince. "Now I will kill you," he hissed. To which the prince replied, "No, you won't." "Yes, I will," Mara hissed again. "No, you won't," said the prince, "because I now know who you are." "No, you don't," said the Evil One. "Yes, I do," said the prince. "You are myself." At which Mara vanished. So the irony being here that Mara, the master of illusion, was himself an illusion, which dissolved like the bad dream it was, at the moment that the prince awakened from what had been a lifelong sleep. By sitting quietly and turning the light of his awareness onto himself and then back onto the world around him, and then again from himself to the world, from the world to himself, on the day of his awakening, at the sight of the morning star, The young man knew what the distinction was between the world and himself, and he knew how to free himself from the trick that his very own mind had been playing on him. The very same trick that our own minds are playing on us throughout most of our waking days. We perceive, and therefore believe, that the world is outside of ourselves, that there are some invisible boundaries separating us from the rest of the world, separating seeing from colors, hearing from sound, smelling from fragrance, tasting from flavors, and textures from touch. These are lots of names we've given to these two sides of that imaginary boundary. There's here and over there. There's myself and you, subject and object, and so on. All of which are so familiar, we simply take them for granted. So basically, Zen practice is nothing more than a commitment that we make from ourselves to the world while we sort out our actual relationship, meaning until we see the illusion of separation. That's the radical part. There is no separate self over here. There are no others over there to be separated from. I have no existence right now without all of you here with me right now, to say nothing of gravity and oxygen and daylight and food. And yet we human beings have become adapted to living in what is basically, from an awakened point of view, an upside-down world, with me in the center and all of you around the sides. So what does an awakened one see? On the morning of his awakening, what the Buddha saw was his own miraculous face appearing as the morning star, appearing as the branches of an overhanging tree, as a lovely young woman carrying water in a jar on her head, as bees and flowers, as grass and flowing water. In other words, he saw the reality of the present moment as if for the first time. And for the first time, he knew that he wasn't separate from the world around him. He knew that he wasn't alone. There was no thing and no one outside of himself, to which he famously said the entire universe in the 10 directions is the true human body. As a result of his all-inclusive vision, the Buddha recommended a right-side-up view of the world in which each of us is devoting ourselves to the welfare of everyone else, as in the title of Joanna Macy's Human Ecology book, World as Lover, World as Self. In his search for liberation from suffering, the young prince realized an intimate connection with all things, and in doing so undermined his own self-concern, self-love, conceit, and ignorance, a radical act that diverted the flow of his ambition away from accumulating more cargo for himself alone to preserving the resources of this life-giving planet for others. As in the Quaker saying, live simply so that others can simply live. And so he did. So this is the primary vow, no different really than the golden rule. Treat others as you wish to be treated. So there's a story to this point that I heard a long time ago about the difference between heaven and hell. In hell, there's a long banquet table of delicious food. However, the people in hell are only allowed 2-foot-long chopsticks with which to eat, and so they are starving. In heaven, it's just the same, a banquet table full of food. However, the people in heaven use their long chopsticks to feed one another across the table. So in order to live together in heaven, we need to switch our focus from this tiny cutout that is me and mine alone onto the world around us. In other words, to turn the light of awareness from focusing on our small self to focusing on our true self, or what Suzuki Roshi called from our small mind to our big mind. And how do we do that? Well, one answer to this question of how is to find yourself a quiet spot on this sacred earth where you can sit peacefully and study the very same questions that brought our young prince to the completion of his quest. In the tradition that I've been committed to for most of my adult life, the best and most supportive way for undertaking our own spiritual quest is to do so with others, so-called others. I say so-called because once you find your seat in the company of good friends, the idea of others melts away, and the feeling of company, of community, and of belonging becomes the core truth of your life. We are not alone on this planet or in this universe. We are traveling together, and we are desperately dependent on one another for our very survival, as individuals and as a species, which at the moment, sadly, doesn't seem to be going very well. And yet we have no choice as individuals who are making up what we know of community, whether here at the Zen Center or there at Stanford. Our commitment to collective well-being is not for myself alone. There is no self alone. And yet, as individuals, we each have agency in co-creating the world that we wish there to be. So here's another story from the Zen tradition having to do with the point of undertaking such a seemingly strenuous effort in the first place, the effort at self-discovery. One day, Master Dongshan was washing his bowls when he saw two birds fighting over a frog. A monk who also saw this asked the teacher, "Why does it come to that?" Dongshan replied, "It's for your benefit, Acharya." I think what Dongshan is telling his student is that these terrible aspects of living in the world, the ones we know so well, are helping to open our hearts, helping us to become more and more compassionate with ourselves and each other. And that's the hope, anyway. Learning and strengthening compassion is what all the bodhisattvas, the awakening beings, come here to this suffering world to do. The word compassion itself is from the Latin, to suffer with. And Kuan Yin, the bodhisattva of compassion, is born in response to the cries of a suffering world. When we sit quietly together in the mornings here at Green Gulch, or when you sit quietly at home or at school, we are giving ourselves time to gather our hearts and minds at the very center of both the awesomeness and awfulness of the suffering world. To be quiet and still enough to hear the cries, both inside and outside of ourselves, and then together to make our best effort at finding an appropriate response. I was born shortly after the Second World War. I was in grammar school during the Korean War and for the assassinations of a president and his brother, and of the religious leaders who had so hoped to save this world. I then went on to college at the start of the Vietnam War, and since then through the wars that never seem to end, like the ones in Eastern Europe and in the Middle East, raging right now. It's no accident that at the age of 29, I made my way to a monastery, a refuge, as we Buddhists say, as if the sadness of the world would never find me there. Well, as you might have guessed, that didn't really work very well, although I and many of my Zen comrades really did give it a try. We just couldn't think, feel, wish, or meditate our way out of suffering. So at some point, or more accurately at several points, we each have to choose which path we are going to take through our life. A path that will lead either toward greater suffering or away from greater suffering, both for ourselves and for others. At the crossroads, these two pathways still look very much the same. Each of us is at the center of deciding, and what we choose is based on what we imagine will be best for us. And since there are no directional markers, there are no signs or flashing lights to tell us which is the right way to go, it's very helpful to find guides along the way. Sometimes a mere word or a phrase can help us in our search for the way, such as this exchange between our founding Chinese Zen ancestor Dongshan and his teacher Yunyan. Just before leaving his teacher to set out on his own, Dongshan asked Yunyan, "If after many years someone should ask me to portray my teacher's likeness, how should I respond?" After remaining quiet for a while, Yunyan said, "Just this person." Dongshan was lost in thought. Yunyan then said, "Honorable monk, having assumed the burden of the great matter of birth and death, you must be very cautious." And yet, as he set out on his pilgrimage, Dongshan remained doubtful of what Yunyan had said. Later, as he was crossing a river, he saw his own image reflected in the water, and he experienced a great awakening to the meaning of what his teacher had said to him. Just this person. and he composed the following verse. Earnestly avoid seeking without, lest it recede far from you. Today I am walking alone, yet everywhere I meet him, everywhere I meet her, the one who is now no other than myself. But I am not now him, I'm not now her. I must be understood in this way, in order to merge with suchness, with reality itself. So these simple stories from the Zen tradition are the signposts at the crossroads, invisible and transient as they may be, no flashing lights, no concrete markers, and that may be because, unlike the usual signposts, they are not pointing to anywhere else or anyone else or some future time. They are pointing right at us. How else can we understand Dongshan's awakening to just this person? At that very moment, a moment he had been preparing himself for a very long time, he saw his own face reflected in the water, and he understood his teacher's meaning, just this person. He understood that his own mind, our own minds, are nothing more than, as the Buddha himself suddenly knew, the great mirror wisdom of the present moment, in which this way or that way are mere concepts arising like waves on the vast blue sea. This understanding of ourselves as the world, as the truth, as nothing much worth fussing about, and as just fine the way we are, is called the ultimate truth. The truth not dependent on words or reasoning or signposts of any kind, where all beings belong and are free. This is the all-inclusive reality in which each of us is being met and held right now. The reality that the Buddha saw on the morning of his awakening. In the first few days following that realization, the young man went to find his 5 old ascetic comrades to share with them what he had come to see and to understand. In the Buddha's first sermon, to be found in the ancient Pali Canon, he gave his new disciples a teaching that had arisen from his experience of awakening under the tree, an experience that words themselves can never reach, and yet which the Buddha, by means of words, such as those in the first sermon, encouraged his students to find for themselves. In his first sermon, the Buddha gave his 5 new disciples 2 of the foundational teachings that we are still studying today. The teachings of non-duality, not two, and of causality, two. We can think of these 2 teachings as the 2 truths. There's the ultimate truth, non-duality, and the relative truth, causality. The ultimate truth, the truth of non-dual nature of the universe, is based on the Buddha's experience at the sight of the morning star, in which not only the star, but the entire universe no longer appeared to be outside or separate from himself. A profound experience of deep belonging, at which he reportedly also said to himself, I and all beings on earth together attain enlightenment at the same time. And then he taught the relative truth, the truth about how things appear to our normal human consciousness, appear as separate and substantial, like Mara, the evil one, master of illusions, appearing as beginnings and endings, as arising and falling away, as causes resulting in effects. The relative truth is sometimes referred to as this, then that, causality, a necessary pattern for the unique human activity of storytelling. For example, once upon a time, a prince sat under a tree and became a Buddha. This, then that, causality. And that, in itself, in terms of truth, is just a story. How normal humans think, the Buddha then taught to humans by means of the 4 noble truths, causes and their effects. For example, suffering, as he had seen, was caused by the illusory nature of believing himself as separate from the world. And the cessation of suffering was a result of waking up from that illusion, the very thing that Buddha's teaching is designed to help us to do. By cutting through illusions, we are freed from all such erroneous views, including the illusion of cause and effect. And yet, as the Buddha said, radiant is the mind, O monks, and sometimes it appears defiled, as though by defilements that come from outside of itself,
and therefore the ordinary person doesn't know the mind as it truly is. So because afflictions that cause suffering are like clouds that arise in our radiant minds, we must be very careful not to speak about compassion and truth as if it's simply a matter of watching those clouds float away. We need to speak in a more conventional way. We need to speak in relative truths, the truths that depend on words and reasoning, depend on how we think and how we care about others. It's by means of the relative truth that we can speak about the kind of suffering that is in the news each and every day, and like the coronavirus and the ceaseless warfare, doesn't seem at risk of going away. This idea that we must turn toward suffering, toward the unbearable pain that suffering is causing, not just in ourselves, but also in those in this world who are forced to endure more than any living being should have to bear, is, as the Buddhist said, the true pathway to liberation. But before we can do that, before we can truly turn towards suffering, we have to believe what our friends and our neighbors are telling us. We have to believe that there is in this world a right way and a wrong way, as we head out on the path toward no way at all, the path of just this person. So here's one timely example of such suffering that James Baldwin shared with those who could listen in an article from the New Yorker back in 1963, my first year of high school, entitled "A Letter from a Region in My Mind." I read this many years back in a talk at Green Gulch, and yet the sting of reading it again is as sharp today as it was then. This experience that James Baldwin is describing took place inside of him at a time when he, as a young man, was singing and clapping along with the members of his church. The anguish that filled me cannot be described. It moved in me like one of those floods that devastates counties, tearing everything down, tearing children from their parents and lovers from each other, and making everything an unrecognizable waste. All I really remember is the pain, the unspeakable pain. It was as though I were calling up to heaven, and heaven would not hear me. And if heaven could not hear me, and if love could not descend from heaven to wash me, to make me clean, then utter disaster was my portion. So listening to the cries of the world is not so easy. And yet, as I said, it's all that the bodhisattvas have come here to this suffering world to do. Confronting afflictions, whether they appear to be coming from inside ourselves or inside of others, can only be done when we are ready to meet those afflictions with the kind of tensile strength that comes from practicing kindness and patience, generosity and wisdom and compassion. Otherwise, we will most likely turn away, or we might even add to the grief and to the misery because, as we so often say, it is just unbearable. But once we're ready, we can then both truly listen and truly speak. As one of the people who is helping us to listen to the cries within our own spiritual community recently said, "You have to talk. And when someone is talking, you have to listen." We really need to know what is right and what is wrong in this suffering world, what is fair or unfair, generous or selfish, wholesome or unwholesome, before we settle for a non-dualistic interpretation of the world, as ultimately true as a non-dualistic view of the world might be. We need to begin our study of ourselves as determined critics, as detectives and spies, and as empathic listeners to sentiments other than our own. We need to ask others about those things that we don't see or understand, whether in ourselves or in the world around us. It was in this spirit of deep inquiry and for the purposes of cultivating his compassion that Master Dongshan replied to his student, "It's for your benefit, Acharya." So, dear students of this precious life, at the beginning of your own journeys of self-discovery and communal responsibilities, please consider giving yourselves a break now and then, of sitting quietly and allowing your mind and your breath to harmonize. The basic instruction preceding meditation is concerned with quieting our restless bodies and minds, of calming down, which in the Buddhist tradition is called shamatha, or tranquility practice. Shamatha is familiar to us from all of those moments spent gazing at the moon, or the ocean, or the dying embers of a campfire. During tranquility practice, the breath deepens and our eyes soften, as they do each night before heading off to sleep. The first step in the practice of meditation is finding a quiet room, as suggested in an essay called The Universal Recommendation for Zazen, written by Zen Master Dogen in the 13th century, shortly after he returned to Japan from his studies in China. Many of the specific instructions in this text, some of which I gave to you earlier this afternoon, were echoed 8 centuries later here in California by the young female priest who was giving meditation instruction on my first visit to the Zen Center in 1978. Eat and drink moderately. Cast aside all involvements and cease all affairs. Do not think good or bad. Do not administer pros and cons. Cease all the movements of the conscious mind, the gauging of all thoughts and views. So these lines are instructions concerning our attitude as we are learning how to sit. I think often people, like me, want more elaboration about just what it is we are supposed to do while sitting there for 30 or 4 minutes waiting for the bell. Wanting more instruction leads many beginning meditators to believe that they are not doing it right. And yet, as you just heard in Dogen's instructions, don't think good or bad. Don't administer pros and cons. Just don't. Whatever it is that comes up in your mind, don't. And when you don't, quite naturally, those bothersome thoughts, like the appearance of Mara, the evil one, will simply vanish. And so then, is there something that we can do? Well, yes, there is. We can, as Dogen further instructs, with a few updates from the generation of teachers to follow, we can sit either in the full lotus or half lotus position, or upright in a chair, with our clothing loosely bound and arranged in order, our left palm facing upward, on our right palm with our thumb tips touching in front of our navels. This is the cosmic mudra, which I showed you earlier. And thus sit upright in correct bodily posture, neither inclining to the left nor to the right, neither leaning forward nor backward. Be sure your ears are on a plane with your shoulders and your nose in line with your navel. Place your tongue against the front roof of your mouth, with your teeth and your lips both shut. Your eyes should always remain open, and you should breathe gently through your nose. Once you have adjusted your posture, take a deep breath. Inhale and exhale. Rock your body right and left, and then settle into a steady, immovable sitting position. So adding to Dogen's instructions, the modern-day Soto Zen school in Japan suggests that we not try to control our breathing, to just let it come and go, so naturally that we forget that we're breathing. And they also go on to say, do not concentrate on any particular object or control your thought. When you maintain a proper posture and your breathing settles down, your mind will naturally become tranquil. When various thoughts arise in your mind, do not become caught up by them or struggle with them. Neither pursue nor try to escape from them. Just leave your thoughts alone, allowing them to come up and to go away freely. The essential thing in doing Zazen is to awaken from distraction and dullness and to return to the right posture from moment to moment. So that's pretty much it. The basic instruction for making of our bodies into what Dogen calls the Buddha Mudra. The Buddha Mudra is similar to the cosmic mudra, except that it's your whole body making the defining shape and not just your hands. Dogen said this about the Buddha Mudra. When one displays the Buddha Mudra with one's whole body and mind, sitting upright in samadhi, even for a short time, everything in the entire Dharma world becomes the Buddha Mudra, and all the space in the universe completely fills with enlightenment. I think that's a pretty big assertion of what we do when we sit, and yet for Dogen Zenji, it is the truest and most basic instruction for a human being. Display the Buddha Mudra with your whole body and mind while sitting upright in samadhi. And yet what is perhaps assumed, but not directly stated in this particular teaching, is that we do this together. In fact, the word samadhi literally means placing together. Placing the self, the falsely imagined and isolated self, together with all things, and thereby becoming who you really are. And that is the entire universe filled to the brim with enlightenment, even for a moment, in a joyful and instantaneous reunion. For me, this placing together is the most important thing that the Buddha saw at the moment of his awakening. He saw that he was the Buddha Mudra, and that the Buddha Mudra was and still is reality itself, just like this, the inescapable presence of the present moment, in which we human beings are at once either trapped or free, depending entirely on how we see it. On this day, and every day for that matter, we are given this opportunity to reflect on the present moment and to see for ourselves that there is nothing whatsoever outside of this, or separate from this, or excluded from this. And given that nothing whatsoever can be done about this present moment because it is what we truly are alive on this earth together. It's all that we've got and all we will ever have, and therefore we have to take good care of it. The Buddha Mudra with all of its horrors and delight. And when we're called, we have to respond, thereby altogether creating the moments to follow. This is our life of karma, meaning action. Good deeds leading to good results, and bad deeds leading to harm. A concern for the suffering of humankind is what motivated the Buddha to sit down under the Bodhi tree in the first place. He didn't know what would happen as he sat there, but he had a great hope of finding a pathway to freedom from the suffering that he had witnessed in the society in which he lived, and not so different from the one in which we are living today, with its killing and stealing, sexualizing, lying, slandering, poisoning, bragging, hoarding, and hating. And therefore we too can simply sit with great determination to study ourselves, our actions, and our motives in the same hope of finding relief from this seemingly tireless cycle of greed, hatred, and delusion. Without such an understanding of what we are doing or why, as far as I am concerned, sitting for me would be an enormous waste of time. And so although our sitting practice may not have been of help in saving any lives last week or this year or even in this lifetime, finding a pathway of freedom for all beings may still be the best hope we have to alter the course of human history, just as it did over 2,000 years ago in a small village in the foothills of the Himalayas. And yet I think we all know that this request from inside of our hearts to alter the course of human history is very tender and may take quite some time to be revealed even to ourselves. So how do we find it? By showing up completely, just as we are, with no gaps and no excuses. Living for the benefit of others was for the Buddha, as for all of us, something that needed to be learned. Which is why many of us brought ourselves to a place such as Green Gulch and such as this meeting here today, where there are teachers and teachings and something unfathomable and seemingly mysterious called the Great Matter, that we long to learn about ourselves, about each other, and about the world. And yet approaching the mystery directly isn't possible, since, as I said earlier, it's just what we are, a great and wonderful mystery, outside all notions, such as gain or loss, self or other, upside or downside. What we really are isn't like any of that, isn't like the way that we usually think. The great mystery of reality itself simply doesn't submit to the limitations of human thought or human language. So the best we can do for each other is to use our limited words carefully and precisely in order to create the conditions for realization, conditions that have been practiced for many thousands of years. The word realization means the act of becoming fully aware of something as fact. It also means to cause something to happen or to give physical form to something. In other words, to become what you have realized. In this case, to become the Buddha Mudra with your whole body and mind while sitting, standing, or walking upright in samadhi. And then, as that young boy observed after sitting quietly for a few minutes, not to do anything at all. Someone once said that Zen can best be discovered by going through an exhaustive list of what it is not. I think some of you may have already gotten a sense of that if you have ever listened to or read the Heart Sutra, which we chant every morning at the Zen Center. And for those of you not familiar with the Heart Sutra, it goes something like this. No eyes, no ears, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no sight, no sound, no taste, no touch, no object of mind, no suffering, no cause, no cessation of suffering, and no path leading to the cessation of suffering, until finally there is no attainment and nothing to attain. How shocking is that? So whatever is left over at the end of that recitation is what the Buddha is said to have realized the morning of his awakening, when everything he thought he was had completely vanished. According to the Heart Sutra, what's left over was a mantra. Gate gate par sam gate bodhisvaha. The word mantra itself comes from a Sanskrit root, man, meaning mind. So a mantra is the thought behind our speech or our actions, that impulse or intention that's deep within our hearts to do something. But what? To kill people or to protect them? To love our neighbors as ourselves or to hate them? We all have to choose, and then we all have to work for it to the end of our days. Although the mantra at the end of the Heart Sutra sounds a little less mysterious when translated into English, it's gone, gone, completely gone, gone beyond, Bodhi Svaha. Still, it leaves us to wonder, who's gone? And gone where? But most importantly, how does this have anything to do with me? Which is why the word Bodhi at the end there means to understand completely, which means the ending of all such questions. I think what's true of the Heart Sutra is true of our Zazen practice as well. Whatever is left over after you have settled into your seats will best be discovered by what it is not. And again, from Zen Master Dogen, who tried to help us to understand, it's not pursuing words or following after speech. It's not learning meditation. It's not the practicing or realizing of supernatural powers. And it's really not the wasteful delight in the spark from a flintstone. Until finally, at the very end, he tells us what it is. It is simply the Dharma gate of repose and bliss, the practice realization of totally culminated enlightenment, the Buddha Mudra, whole body and mind, sitting upright in samadhi, if only for a moment, like this one. And then he wrote this poem. The birds have vanished down the sky. Now the last cloud drains away. We sit together, the mountain and me, until only the mountain remains. So why don't we sit together now for about 15 minutes? And after that, first I'll ring a bell in a minute, and then after that, I will welcome whatever questions you might have from this morning. So a few little brief reminders to straighten your spine while lifting your sternum and flattening your shoulder blades down your back. Align your ears with the top of your shoulders and your nose with your navel. Place your hands in the cosmic mudra, if you like, with your right hand cradling the left and your thumb tips gently touching. You can rock your body to the right and then to the left, slightly forward and backward, until you feel aligned in an upright, balanced, and stable position. Take a few breaths through your nose, down into your abdomen, and then allow the breath to enter and exit naturally. Release any tension that you find in your head or your neck, your torso, your arms, and your legs. Watch your thoughts and feelings as they come and go, like clouds in an empty sky. And as Dogen teaches, think not thinking. How do you think not thinking? Non-thinking. This is the essential art of Zazen. So let's just quietly sit together for these 15 minutes. I'm going to ring a bell now, and then again 15 minutes from now. So I welcome anything any of you would like to say about your experience, or anything else you would like to offer to our group this morning. Dr. Rich, if you have any questions that are written up as you did yesterday, you're welcome to bring those forward too.
Thank you. The first question has to do with the phrase finding relief. Many people start with the experience that they're seeking relief, as you told, and even how the Buddha may have been seeking relief initially. And then that can be understood as a very egocentric seeking. Myself seeks to be in comfort. And yet, as you continued to teach today, the seeking of relief began to take on a community quality. And if you could just say more about that, those two words, seeking or finding relief, and speak to it both on the small self and the collective self.
Yeah, thank you. So you said the term seeking relief or finding relief for yourself, which can seem very selfish. And I think that's right. And I think we are motivated, first of all, by selfishness, about me. This is all about me, because that's where the pain seems to be. I think what happens for those of us after some time of seeking relief for ourselves, we begin to realize that it's not going to go very well if we're not including everyone around us, if we're not including the people that are in our lives, our families, our friends. I mean, there is some fantasy about just going off in the woods and just staying there. And I think there are those who do that, the kind of hermits or the lone sitters and so on. And that there is a tradition for that, which is not ours. In fact, Zen is understood as a us practice, not a me practice. We don't sit alone. We don't sit off in the woods. We don't have hermit practice. We sit together in the Zendo, which is a big open hall. In Green Gulch, it was an old barn that's been converted for a Zendo. So, I sit there with others, literally, and then the teaching is all about devoting whatever merit might come from my own personal effort to the welfare of others. The image of kind of like a tick on a dog, you can just take so much for yourself, and after a while, you just are bloated, and what's the point of that? So really, it's a matter of releasing whatever good comes from your life to benefit others. This idea of giving rather than getting. I think it's really a surprise to discover, as I said yesterday, that this secret really is in giving of yourself, not in getting for yourself. That's not our culture's necessarily message. That's not the primary marketing message that I'm used to hearing. It's really it's not getting that's going to make you happy. It really is when you give, and I think we do know that. We know that from the times that we've been generous with others, and also not to get thanks. It's not like giving for the outcome of, boy, that they really like me now. It's really about just giving without any expectation of some return. Just because you just want to give a smile, give a hi, give us some friendship, give a helping hand, whatever those things are that we all have heard as ways of being generous. And I think this morning there was a teaching of the paramitas, and generosity is the first of those. The Bodhisattva trainings is generosity, dana paramita. And then from there, you develop patience and energy and enthusiasm and concentration, meditation, and so on. So there's actually a developmental progress that can go on, starting with giving, which I think we can all start doing anytime we like, giving a hand, opening the door for somebody in the store, or can I help you pick that up, or whatever it is. I love watching those TikToks of people helping people. It feels so good, So to be that person who's willingly and helping others, I think that begins to break down that idea that it's about me,
And your image of the flow, that when the cup is full and there's this joy and vitality that is experienced because things are being given, and that it would actually perhaps be uncomfortable, like your image of, they could explode because you just put it all in.
Like Scrooge McDuck on a pile of money. It's like, great. It's like, what good is that? Or Midas. These, we know these stories of accumulating for yourself, and there's no necessarily happiness there. And I haven't seen it in people that I know well. I see it in those who are generous. So, yeah. Yeah, that's very timely. Very timely question. I think the term tensile strength is one that I'm rather fond of. Developing tensile strength to face danger and fear and so on. I used the example yesterday of firemen. They train to face fire. They don't just go in there and go, I want to help out here. It's like you'll get burned and you'll also run out of energy. So it really is about training ourselves and I think this sitting upright, as strange as it is a really a way of developing tensile strength, because when you sit still, like many of you just now for 15 minutes, but our normal morning is 2 40-minute periods, which was really hard when I first started at the Zen Center. I thought, whoa, that's really hard. And it took a lot of my, strength and my will to go back in for the second 40 minutes. And little by little, over time, it became a source of great comfort and of strength. I can sit still and quietly through an awful lot of stuff. And I wasn't able to do that very well when I was young. You could hardly sit through anything. So I think that I have grown some capacity for calm and for being present and staying with suffering, which, as we all know, comes from everyone we love and care about will be suffering at some time. And we ourselves will be suffering through loss of loved ones and so on, and warfare and the environment. All of these things are just terribly pressing on us. So we need to have that kind of uprightness and willingness and ability to face what's there and to speak kindly and to offer help as we can. I think without that tensile strength, I think it's probably best not to try to do that. You will wear yourself out. We don't recommend that to the newer students. It's like, let yourself have some time to develop this quality of presence. And then you might be ready. We get a lot of burnout people from trying really hard jobs in the world, and they've done very, good things, but they're exhausted. Social workers and nurses and so on, they're just exhausted from that. So they've come for some relief, for some rest. And like with hiking or whatever else physically we do, once you've rested, then you can resume. You can go back. But if you don't rest, you probably give up. You say, I don't want to hike. I don't want to help, So we do need to learn how to balance those forces that push down on us, and also that we're able to return and meet as best we can. And not by yourself. I think that's the other mistake a lot of people make, is this kind of, I'm going to do it. I'm going to put an end to this or that. And it's not possible. So for me, having a community is really also a form of tensile strength. I belong to a very big group of people, Buddhists around the world, and growing. And that group of people have the same commitment to the same values. So I think not to go alone is another really important way of being strong. Okay. Thank you for your question. Yeah, it's us against the AI, isn't it? It's like, I actually asked AI who I was, and it said these amazing things that had nothing to do with me, that I speak all these languages. And so I thought, that's very curious. Anyway, yeah, there is a very big strain of confusion really about what's happening actually in my own life. I think what I was thinking when you were asking that question is like, well, what about me? How's this working for me? I can read the data. I do. I look at all these things too. I'm very curious about what's coming out in the big media presentations. I'm interested in science, quantum physics, and I read a lot about physics and science and astronomy and microbiology and all of that. It's all fascinating. And I'm also really interested when I have a number of students who are microbiologists and physicists and quantum physicists who find the sitting practice to bring them to tears, that actually the reality of their own physical bodies engaging in something like quiet sitting or walking or just meeting with someone else, meeting with a teacher who can bring up questions about them that are underneath the data, underneath the proof of whatever it might be. As my grandma used to say, the proof is in the pudding. How does it taste? How does it smell? How does it look? How do you feel? Is that making you feel good? Is it enough to take a pill? Probably not. I think my generation figured that out finally. It's not enough. You really want to have something in your life that feels whole, complete, and that authenticity that we talked about yesterday. What's authentic for me about anything that I'm doing? Am I really there? Am I present? Am I aware? Did I see what just went in front of me and so on? Am I alive? Am I aware of my senses? Come to your senses. I think that's the biggest one, is come back to your senses. Where are you? What are you doing up here? That's okay. That's really an important thing. As you know, as a university, you got to work with that. That's really important. But when that's all that's happening, there's kind of a tragic loss of heartfelt, how do you feel? So I think it's each of us that has to decide, given all the opportunities to choose, which path works best. I'm pretty much on the right foot, left foot, walking up the path as the only way that really makes sense, that I'm in touch with my body throughout the day and what I'm thinking, and that I'm seeing when I'm going off into some strange place, and I can come back, to my breath, come back to my steps, to my actions. So I think each of us has to prove that for ourselves, find that for ourselves, and we'll just keep on saying things. We'll keep on showing up in our robes and our community efforts and so on, and hopefully the word will spread as it has in centuries past, and it's been of great help, for many, many cultures, and I hope for ours. It's my great hope that this is something we need, and that science somehow, I don't think, is going to take it away. I really am not too worried about that. I I quoted Ravelli yesterday, quantum physics, who said, everyone kept asking him, do you know Nagarjuna, the great Buddhist philosopher? And he was like, I didn't. And then he did, and he was so moved to be encountering something that really matched his own deep curiosity about where are we, what's happening here, and the great vastness of we don't know. That's never going to lose. We're never going to know. I don't care how many computers we got going here. We will never know what's happening here, how the magic is taking place.
In this vein, does Buddhism offer any teachings that speak about a time after humans are on Earth, or is it all within the framework that humans will continue in their relationship with Earth?
People ask Buddha that question, like, what happens after I die?
And not just individuals, I mean the whole
Right.
species.
Right. Well, that was both as individuals and as a species. Where are we going? What's going to happen? He said, those questions aren't going to help you. They're not going to help you deal with your life right now, the one you have here on this precious planet where we have problems. Just do the work here. And maybe the generations to come will have more work to do. And if we don't do our work, they're going to have a lot of cleanup to do if they're lucky enough to still be able to live on this planet. So, we can kind of predict where we're headed. It's like kind of like bread mold. You eat all the bread and then there's, no more bread mold. So if we keep devouring our resources at the rate we're doing, we know what's going to happen. There may still be life on the planet, but it might not be human life or libraries. Things will be covered over with other kinds of living things, same things we came from. So I feel some joy about life. I feel like it's been a great thing, and I like being human and being able to reflect on all of that. I'm sad that humans haven't done better with their possibility of creating a really precious and safe place for all living things. Maybe it'll happen. I won't live long enough to see it, but I have a great wish that we turn it around. And still, the planet someday will just be will be gone. The stars will be gone. The sun will be gone. We know that. So it's not a matter of holding on to anything. It's a matter of living here and being here now, and being so amazed by life, not to miss it. So I think it would be tragic that our sadness about what's happening would overwhelm the gift of being alive.
That the honoring of life is to be fully present to it.
Yeah. To your own life, your life, my life, each of us, just one, just this person, as Dongshan said, just this person. And that's a lot. That's enough. Uh, No one I know. I think most of us glimmer in and out of the amazement. And then we go back to work and deal with our checking accounts and all those other things that occupy our lives. But those moments that, as you're describing, are very precious, and cultivating access, that forest bathing, which you just described, or just stopping. I suggested yesterday to just stop walking and look around, or go up to a plant. I walked a young student up to, I said, let's go over to that plant and just look at it. And we did. We'd been chatting, and then we looked, and she went, oh, wow. I said, yeah, oh, wow. And it wasn't to name the plant or dissect it or anything, just to look at it. So I think we just need to keep bringing ourselves into connection with what we smell, what we see, to just stop the trying to figure it out, give ourselves breaks. And I think that's what you're describing, is that break from figuring it out. So just keep remembering. I used to wear a mala. I still do. I wore a mala, beads, to remind myself that I'm a Buddhist, Buddhist means awake, that I want to be awake. And then that would help me to remember to turn off the chatterbox, and to look and to smell and to appreciate what's there. So it is a cultivation, like almost anything we learn. You cultivate that quality that you described. I don't know if you draw, but that's one way of entering into that space. I used to do workshops with a drawing teacher, and we called it learning to sit, learning to see, learning to draw. And part of drawing, like with a pencil, just drawing that leaf, spending an hour out there, it brings you into that meditative state. So that's another way. I think some people music, some people visual, but anything you can do that brings you closer into that, dropping the tour guide, get her off the bus, get off the bus.
Thank you, Fu, for offering us the gift of community, the gift of being our teacher, and the gift of your teachings. We look forward to being in practice with you again on Monday morning.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Me too. Me too. Thank you both. Thank you, Tia. Thank you, Hunter. Thank you all. Have a wonderful day.